When you are beautiful, there are going to be certain people who have to believe you are incompetent and unintelligent in order to preserve their own ego. There was a TikTok video I posted some time ago where I stitched a young woman making another TikTok talking about how important it is to pay attention to people's insults, because a lot of the time those insults are rooted in projection. And I proceeded to share, my own perspective on this and pretty much validate what this woman was saying in her TikTok. So in the concept of what we're talking about in this video today, where I'm dissecting the fact that this concept of beautiful women being bimbos inherently is actually rooted in ego and pride, and more so from the other party. When people are carrying on with a narrative about you being incompetent and unintelligent, you have to understand that a person who really has something going on for themselves, a person who is really busy, who really has relationships, who is really accomplishing their goals, they don't even have the time. They don't have the luxury of sitting down and fixating on another individual and breaking down whether this person is competent or intelligent. Better yet, they also don't have the luxury of time to put obstacles in this person's way to prove that this person is incompetent to other parties who are observing. So I wanted to break down this notion in this analysis today, this concept of the beautiful bimbo. Beautiful women being unintelligent, being, lackadaisical, being naive, not having any smarts to them, whether it be street smarts, whether it be education-wise. Just this very counterproductive narrative that isn't always fitting. And in a lot of cases, when you encounter certain individuals and they fit this quote unquote narrative of being, the beautiful bimbo according to, societal standards, or maybe just keeping it surface level, they are perceived as conventionally attractive according to societal standards of beauty. When you actually have a conversation with these women, when you have and I'm going to speak specifically to the women for this analysis because I'm a woman myself, so I'm speaking from the woman's perspective. When you actually have a conversation with these women and when you get information about the moves that they're making behind the scenes, you will realize that a lot of those narratives that are being painted about them couldn't be further from the truth. And what I realized is a lot of the time, people are only going out of their way to paint this negative about these women because it is designed to preserve their own ego and pride. When you are dealing with someone who is battling with feelings of envy, and in this context, it's specific to beauty envy, someone who is envious of another person's looks or the attention that another woman receives from her looks, right? From her appearance, the way that she puts herself together, etc. You will realize that when someone is battling with feelings of envy, they are oftentimes battling with feelings of discomfort. And in an attempt to alleviate these feelings of discomfort, they have to pose, or at least they convince themselves, they have to pose a constant threat to their target of envy. So when we wrap all of this up and we put it into the concept of beauty envy, someone who is dealing with beauty envy and someone who is harboring feelings of beauty envy towards another person, this can look like, for example, a beautiful woman in a workplace. I'm going to just break this down and I'm going to provide examples for this analysis. For a lot of you beautiful ladies, this is why your supervisor is making you jump through hoops and your other counterparts are not required to do so. And it's because the moment that the supervisor laid eyes on you, they had to convince themselves in order to alleviate their feelings of envy because they have superficial perspectives regarding your physical appearance. They're fixated on keeping things at the surface level, even though you're interested in showing that you bring other valuable attributes to the table, specific to the job at hand. But because this person is holding on to this false narrative to appease their ego, to preserve their ego, they are not going to give you the opportunity to showcase you are actually competent. Instead, they are going to put obstacles in your path. They're going to set you up for failure. And this is a excerpt in the book, Green Eyes, that dissects this in detail. But they're going to set you up for failure. They're going to give you wrong information. They're not going to train you properly so that other people in that environment can view you as incompetent or can state that you're not equipped enough, you're not knowledgeable enough to complete the task at hand. And you're definitely not going to be looked at, or considered for promotions and opportunities that's going to allow you to move up this professional ladder. Now, with the images that I've presented in this slideshow, it was intentional. A lot of you all, it may not be professional, it could be academic. And we need to start talking about this. We need to start normalizing these conversations because a lot of our young kids and a lot of our young women specifically are experiencing sabotage in the educational sector at the hands of a malicious mentor. We need to talk about it. That malicious advisor that's blocking your child, blocking your daughter, blocking your niece, blocking your granddaughter from proceeding forward educationally, that malicious mentor is the reason for that. They're the culprit for that. And it's because they've come to the conclusion that this little girl reminds me of the pretty popular girl in high school who snubbed me that one time. Or they probably never even knew that I existed, but I was always watching them with an envious eye, and I wished that I was in their place, and I had that deep-seated resentment for them. And I never made peace with that. I never grew out of that mentality. So now I'm lashing out on individuals who present themselves in a similar manner as that girl that I encountered 20 years ago when I was in grade school. And your daughter is at the receiving end of this harsh treatment. And that's why your baby is having a difficult time progressing. So no matter what the sector is, right? Or it could be in a friend group, in a familial group, you will realize that you are always the butt of the joke. People are always acting as if you don't understand what's going on. They're constantly sliding you as if you're not picking up on these jabs. But realistically, you're blindsided because you're trying to wrap your head around why you're always the topic of discussion. Why are you always the center of attention, even when you try to step back and not be at the forefront? Well, it's because people are trying to alleviate these feelings of jealousy and envy, and they're doing so by putting you in predicaments or creating narratives and conversations that put you in a negative light. And oftentimes, if you are dealing with someone who harbors feelings of beauty envy specifically in regards to you, you will realize that they operate from a state of delusion. And this delusion is derived from them trying to desperately preserve their sense of ego and pride. You have to understand that when someone is constantly exposed to their target of envy, and sometimes it's at their own merit, they're constantly looking up their target of envy. They're trying to gauge what this person is up to, what they look like now. A lot of the time it's self-inflicted harm, or it's a self-inflicted injury rather. A lot of the time, those feelings of envy continue to fester. And in order for them to alleviate those festering feelings, they convince themselves, well, I have to pose a constant attack to this person to feel better about myself. And that's where that sadistic component comes into play. That's why a lot of the time, if you've been on the receiving end of this treatment, you will realize when someone took a jab at you, they had a smirk on their face. When they realized that you were the butt of a joke amongst a group, or someone tried to embarrass you or humiliate you in a group capacity, you will realize that there was snickering and laughing. It's because people who are battling with feelings of envy have a sadistic nature. They constantly have to pose some kind of emotional harm, mental harm, or in extreme cases, physical harm. A lot of young women are being set up and jumped or losing their lives, unfortunately, at the hands of a sadistic, envious person. And it's because of this toxic dynamic where a person who is battling with feelings of envy convinces themselves they have to pose some kind of emotional, mental, and or physical harm to their target of envy to alleviate that discomfort that they're feeling inwardly. But nevertheless, I'm actually going to read from the Beauty Envy excerpt in the book Green Eyes to provide some additional context. And the excerpt reads, beauty envy is prevalent when a person is envious of an individual's physical appearance. Of course, beauty is in the eye of the beholder and is completely subjective. But a person who is envious of another person can feel threatened by their aesthetic or the attention the subject of envy receives from others. This person may mimic their object of envy, and by the same token, talk down to them, gossip about them, and belittle their target. This can even lead to delusion under special circumstances. To alleviate feelings of envy, the perpetrator will try to convince themselves that they are superior to the target of envy, or will take jabs at certain things about their appearance while simultaneously imitating it. So as that excerpt in the book was describing, that cognitive dissonance that I was depicting earlier in the analysis is rooted in them trying to entail some kind of superiority over you. When someone sees you walk into a room and it immediately ignites feelings of inferiority, their mind goes into a damage control strategy. Okay, how do I regain that sense of superiority that I had previously, right? Around my other coworkers, around my other peers and colleagues that didn't ignite that feeling of inferiority until this new person walked in. How do I regain that feeling of superiority? I get it. Now I pose a constant threat to who I perceive to be the target of envy, right? The person who is eliciting those envious feelings in me. Now I have to utilize divide and conquer tactics amongst their peers and their colleagues to make sure they're isolated. Now I have to create a smear campaign, ruin their reputation, paint them out as if they're unintelligent, as if they're incompetent, as if they're ditzy, a ditz, etc., in order to make myself feel superior again. So once you learn their mode of attack, it's important that you implement necessary strategies to protect yourself. And sometimes protecting yourself does not look like staying in that toxic environment. And you all know I'm big on this. I have several analyses breaking this down. Because if you are around somebody who is more dedicated to your downfall than you actually progressing and achieving, you have to understand that around that group, amongst that environment, you are only going to get but so far. And there are several strategies listed in the books that I reference on this channel that you can personally utilize to implement the best course of action. All right, babes, that's all that I have for this analysis today. I want to thank you all so much for watching. But of course, I want to hear you all's comments, perspectives, opinions, and personal experiences in the comment section below. I look forward to speaking to you guys in the next analysis, babes. Take care.